This Hangout on Air is now live. Hello and welcome to Talking About Survivor. I'm Christiana Ellis.
Who likes Survivor? This guy. Especially this episode. But I'm Mike.
There was some good stuff happening this time.
Yeah, and it went the way that I wanted it to for once.
Yeah.
for twice. Well, I guess last time it didn't go exactly how we wanted it to.
We didn't get what we wanted, but some interesting things happened. It didn't just go in a predictable way.
Right. And we didn't lose the guy or at least I'm rooting for last time. This time it went the way that I wanted it to.
Yeah. And this is the penultimate episode. And I feel like normally we would have to be in a hurry to do this episode because the finale would be on Sunday, except for this season it's on Wednesday for some reason. I'm not complaining exactly. I already have a lot of other TV on Sunday that it would be competing with if that was happening. Not to mention
this last season too.
I think you might be right, and I'm still not used to it, I suppose. Although, as you tweeted, do you want to talk about that article that you tweeted at me earlier this week?
Yeah, I was reading. I follow a Twitter account called TV by the Numbers, I think is what it's called. Mm-hmm. And they tweet out like some Nielsen stuff every once in a while. It's pretty interesting. But the one they tweeted out today that day was that it was. I'm trying to find it to I quote it correctly. It was like the most watched TV show that evening, even against the American Idol finale.
Wow. So, well, American Idol has announced it's going to have its last season, so that one is kind of on the decline, clearly. Yep. But not so Survivor.
Nope, Survivor is clearly going strong. 30, and your response was not bad for 30 seasons. I mean, that's not bad for any season.
Yeah.
Particularly notable that something has been on the air for 30 seasons and can still win a night.
Yeah. But yeah, so that's pretty cool news. Just because I don't know, I feel like I don't know if you feel this way too, but I feel like I often have to defend my love of this show to people. And so it's a little bit vindicating, it's like, oh no, there's other people. I mean, obviously we know that the show's on the air. It wouldn't be still on the air if there weren't people out there watching it. But the idea that it's not just the hardcore that haven't left, but there's continual like new viewers coming in.
Yes. So yeah, and especially and also another point to mention is that it's also the spring season, so it has none of the assistance of the advertisement during the NFL on CBS. Mm-hmm. Because they do advertise a lot. Not that you watch the NFL. But
I believe that could make a difference, though.
Yes, because the NFL wins everything on Sunday, numbers-wise, and they're promoting on to a large audience. So I would have to think their fall numbers are probably pretty strong. So to think this with no additional assistance, there's no March Madness going on right now. There's not a thing that CBS could have used. It is doing it on its own merits. Mm-hmm. So.
Well, so do you want to let's just jump right into the episode. We started with Mike being very pleased with how the previous tribal council had gone, even though Shireen was, had left. He just felt as though he had landed some blows with his whole little play there. Alas, our hopes that maybe Dan would maybe reconsider where he was placing his loyalty seems to have not been fulfilled. And at this point in the episode, I was still prepared to say that Dan was making a huge mistake. But when we look at how everything played out by the end of the episode, they did not turn against him. They were going to vote for Carolyn and not him.
Yep. Yeah, I thought that was interesting because I thought at this point that I was also thinking he was making a huge mistake in not even thinking about it. And what I realized is, yes, while he did land some blows and he got them to start to turn on each other, he actually, I don't want to say made it worse for himself because he was already like the guy that was going to go, but he galvanized the fact that he should be the guy to go because now we didn't want to turn on ourselves, so let's all really reinforce that, like he called himself public enemy number one.
Yeah.
Like they could really rally behind, we don't have to worry about anything. As long as Mike doesn't win, we don't have to go through that again.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I don't necessarily know that that's going to happen next time. I don't think anybody really wants to go to the end with him. I'm starting to get on your agreement with you there that he probably is going to have to win probably all of the immunities. There may be one that he can slip through, but I think you're right. I just don't think he's such a threat to win the immunities and he's such a threat to win the game that even if you wanted to use him to advance yourself, you wouldn't risk it because he's just not a guy. Like, because we don't like just how we don't like the other people as much that he's there with, they know that everybody doesn't like those other people, and that's what gives them the shot. So I'm not holding out hope that he can win. I don't think it's going to be very difficult for him to win this game.
Yeah, I mean, I agree, and because what it comes down to is like our only sort of hope there was this idea that, oh, if someone else might need to use him, but the problem is, if there was ever a time that he could be voted out, everyone would want to vote out him and not whoever this other hypothetical person is.
Correct.
So there's never going to be anyone else who is in danger when Mike could be voted out.
Right.
So no one's ever going to side with him instead of voting for him.
Right. And then that's what I was trying to say is it's almost getting worse the longer he sticks around because it makes them want to not have him because their disappointment in not being able to vote him out is making them want to do it even more than they would normally.
Well, not only that, but I think also, and it's hard to blame him for this, but I think being so dramatically on the outs and being public enemy number one, I think I'm still rooting for him, but I feel like he's still at this point scrambling so hard to stay in the game that he's making enemies of people in a way that would hurt him in the jury, potentially.
That's true because he almost celebrates their losses too much, And you're right. He could end up at a point where there would be enough of them if he did make it to the end that would be saying, we went for Mike so many times and we just could never get him. We're not going to let him win as a reward for us not being able to do that. There might be enough of them that do that. I don't.
Well, especially since
but
you'd at least have a couple of people who would be really leading the emotional charge for that too. You know what I mean? It's like if either Dan or Rodney on the jury are going to be pushing that narrative hard. So it would be easy for people to kind of fall in line with that.
Yeah.
Even if that might not have been their initial instinct.
Right.
So I share your, honestly, I think Carolyn's probably the front runner right now. That's the way it looks to me.
Yeah. I mean, it hurts her that she had to burn her idol and that they didn't know that she had it. And
yeah, well, it's true. Even as I say, she's the front runner. She's also the person who would have gone this time if not for using her idol.
Yep.
So it definitely seems like, as far as everybody else is concerned, the next person to go is either Mike or Carolyn, whichever one of them doesn't win immunity.
Right. And are there enough of them? Are there 5? There's 5, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's probably where those three are going to get together and say only one of them can have immunity, so we just vote the other one. So it's going to be, but the thing is, both of them are the biggest threats to win immunity. So it is likely that one of them will have it and the other will go. Is the most likely scenario in my mind.
Yeah, and it puts us in the unenviable position of potentially looking at a final three of Sierra, Rodney, and Will.
God.
At least Dan is out of that mix.
Yeah, at least Dan is out of that mix. And yeah, God, who wins then? Ugh, that's tough.
I almost feel like I want to give it to Rodney just for sheer entertainment value. As far as deserving, I think maybe Sierra. She played kind of like a boring game, but at least it didn't have any actively negative spots.
Yeah, and she might, we're getting into those kind of immunity challenges where sometimes you have like just someone, the smallest person, like sometimes can win. Like there's balance things and stuff like that. I feel like they've been better about that recently and doing more of the type of stuff they're doing right now, which is, the long endurance and the puzzle making. So, but if she does manage to win an immunity at a key time, it helps her a little bit make a case that she won't say it like this, but it's basically like, you guys all hate these other two, and I managed to stick with my alliance and win immunity when it counts. Like sometimes that's a really weak argument, but if you have the right people on the jury or if the right people on the whatever you call the panel,
I think it's still the jury.
No, I'm talking about the final three, whatever those three are.
Oh yeah, well, in the final.
Yeah, three. In the final three, I think with those ones in there, that could be. It could happen because we've seen it happen before when there's very disliked people who may have deserved it, and someone who didn't necessarily deserve it but didn't piss anybody off has won. And they have to be serious lightning rods, and Rodney is close to that.
I feel like I don't know that anyone would vote against Rodney. You know what I mean? Like vote for someone they don't like just to keep Rodney from getting it, though.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, I don't know that he would get a lot of people rooting for him necessarily, but I don't think he would drive votes away necessarily. Will, I don't think has a shot just because, and so Sierra's game has been boring. Rodney's game comparatively has been louder, but it's also true that as much as he kind of talks, he really hasn't made a lot of big, stupid moves. He mostly just complains a lot at camp.
Yeah, he annoys people, but you're right. He doesn't make them dislike him. They want him. They're getting sick of him, but he's never been a legitimate person whose name's written down. You hear it every once in a while, just kind of some red herrings. Like, man, Rodney, I wish he would go because he's getting on my nerves. But that he's never really discussed as a viable option. Never won immunity that I remember. And if he did, it was a point where he didn't necessarily need it. So he's always been available for them to vote, and no one has ever even discussed it. So you're right. Weirdly, Rodney might be the favorite right now that we've talked through that.
I feel like either Mike or Carolyn wins if they make it to the final three.
Yes.
Probably Mike over Carolyn if they're both there, but that seems unlikely. Neither of them would want to go with the other, even if it came to that.
Yeah, because Carolyn knows that Mike probably has the votes of all of the early jury members. Mike knows that Carolyn has Tyler for sure, maybe Shireen, and then any of the rest of these people would vote for Carolyn over him. So
yeah, but I don't know. I feel like if it is Will, Rodney, and Sierra, then I feel like I think it probably goes to Rodney unless Sierra does something really interesting right near the end.
Yeah, I think so too.
But it's also true that Rodney could barely talk in this tribal council, so the final tribal council might be tricky. Of course, he would have been able to have the final 3 feast.
Yeah, and it might come across like it didn't come across as annoying. It was almost endearing a little bit, you know?
Yeah, all I mean to say, though, is that he's not necessarily going to be able to be eloquent on his own behalf if people challenge him on stuff.
That's true.
But, yeah, hard to say.
The one last thing that I think is just kind of relevant as part of a stream of this discussion, not later in the episode, is that I am just absolutely amazed as a like fan / student of this game, like how we watch like the sociological developments, like just what such a small misstep from Mike became.
Yeah.
And how like literally he didn't, I mean, it wasn't a good thing to do, but
well, he took it back right away.
Right. And just the way that it all played out, and it's been helped by the fact that they haven't been able to get rid of him. So to watch that develop and watch them like further, like I said, galvanize against him over something so seemingly insignificant is amazing. Like kind of like not insignificant, but it was a small misstep that, you know, it just really shows. It's almost like tribal or group think, you know, the way that they all came together when they needed this common enemy, and he just put. It's almost like you didn't see it before, but they were all waiting for this, someone to step up and be like the person to bring them all together, since they were all kind of disparate tribe members, and he just fit that role, and then he helped it by owning that role, and it just went like that, like. You know, and so it goes back to that, how we always talk about this is almost like a microcosm of real group dynamics, and like, but in this hyper environment because of the exhaustion and the competition. And, you know, you can kind of see how something like that could happen in an office environment with a much slower burn. If that kind of, you know, someone could make a very small misstep, and if the culture is such where someone's looking for that person to blame for things, and then when they do get blamed, they own it, and you could watch it, like, it's just interesting to me, you know?
Yeah. Well, especially given that it's came together for different reasons, because it seems like for everyone except Dan, it's mostly just a matter of we think he's a threat, and we're a little frustrated that we're having so much trouble getting rid of him. But for Dan, it is personal and bitter and emotional.
Right. And to make it work like this, you almost need that piece. Like,
yeah,
it couldn't have been this bad if you didn't have the one guy on that side who took it so personally that he just kept riling everybody else up, who didn't necessarily take it that personally and was just kind of looking. And they're like, yeah, we can go with that. And then he keeps it running because it's fueled by his anger. And then Mike on the other side, refusing to like try to work it out with anybody, and just, you know, he's not adamantly refusing, but he kind of is. Like, he is owning the fact that they hate him.
Yeah.
You know, and just even the small things like when by over celebrating his wins, which is really their loss, you know, he's not meaning to do that, or he probably kind of.
Well, it's also a valid thing to do. I mean, we can recognize that it just, you know, on the one hand, you can say it like just further alienates them, but on the other hand, he's feeling like they've been trying to get rid of me for a long time now. Why should I? Like, they already don't like me. And so he would have to almost be relying less on them being friends and more on him being an indisputable best player.
Yep.
Not that I'm defending it, because I do tend to agree that it is his attitude that I think is potentially, because it would be one thing if everyone still wanted to vote him out because they thought he would win, but they were feeling more conflicted personally on, he seems like a great guy, but he's just too dangerous, you know, that sort of thing, versus this idea of like, can't believe he's still here. No.
And so that's how I kind of want to close up. You know, I think I don't know if we've talked about it on this podcast, but somewhere we've talked about like how I've always really bought into the whole fact of like, I want to say it super corporate-y, like having a mission statement, but I do believe that if there's a common purpose that people can rally behind, like that's something I feel really strongly about. And and whenever I'm teaching it, I always use President Kennedy's speech about going to the moon because it's so direct and so clear. He says, we will put a man on the moon by the end of this decade. There's no ambiguity in that. And at the time, we were so far behind the Russians. Like, this wasn't like something we were about to do. This was a big, bold-ass statement. No ambiguity, and everyone rallied behind it, and we did it, and we won the Cold War, we won the space race, we won all. There's a lot of things that waterfalled off of that thing because everybody rallied behind a very simple, direct idea. And I really love that, and then I always teach the opposite end of it is the Cheshire Cat when he asks Alice, where she says, can you tell me where to go from here? And he says, well, that depends. Where are you trying to get to? And she's like, well, I'm not really sure. And he says, then it doesn't really matter which way you go.
Yeah.
So they're very, that's why I love teaching because they're very distinct. But this is almost like they have created this mission statement or whatever of getting rid of Mike. Like, such an easy narrative for them to rally behind. He's the biggest threat. He wins all the challenges. He has a lot of friends on the jury. He made this big misstep. He can't be trusted. Like, Mike needs to go. Like, they say it like that, like it's their mission.
Yeah.
They're like, I could try to work with him. He made a good point, but Mike needs to go. Like, they just get behind it. And it's really interesting to watch that rallying cry,
And none of them are wrong to feel that way.
Correct. That's, again, the other fun part is when you take a step back.
Yeah.
He's not necessarily doing anything wrong by owning it, and they're not necessarily doing anything wrong by feeling it.
I think, honestly, Dan is the only one that I think is wrong, only in the sense that he thinks that he is playing rationally when he is really at his most emotional.
Right.
And this continues. If you watch his Ponderosa video, it's like there's a couple of shots from other people kind of talking to the camera with a slight air of disbelief of like, he really hates Mike. Like, he won't shut up about it. And at the same time, Dan is saying it's like, well, it may sometimes seem like I act impulsively or emotionally, but it's just because I think quickly and I make up my mind and then I stick to it. And it's not that I'm stubborn. It's just that I've already analyzed all the different options and, I'm willing to change my mind. You just have to come to me with evidence. And I'm just thinking it's like, he hurt your feelings and you're mad at him.
You betrayed me.
Well, yeah, and he's going on and on about how, like, oh, he wanted the letter from his wife so much, and Mike knew that. And it's like, well, he wasn't stopping you from getting it. That was never on the table. The only one who would have stopped you from getting that letter is you deciding not to pay the $20 for it. You could have done that too. You didn't have to go in with this agreement that everybody else had. And not only that, but even if we all acknowledge that it was a dumb thing that Mike did in that auction, he also recognized that almost immediately and took it back. So it's one thing to say, that hurt my feelings, I felt betrayed, it made me think I couldn't trust you. But to hold on to it for this long. Now, that said, he has also said in some of his post-show interviews that he might have been more open to listening to Mike at a couple of points, except that Mike's attitude, like Mike got mad back at him for overreacting.
That feels like rationalization.
I wouldn't be surprised, but it's just, it's worth observing that that's his side of the story, is that Dan felt like he needed more proof than just a superficial apology, and that when asked for that, Mike got mad back and like, well, where's your loyalty to me? Why should I have to prove myself? That sort of thing.
My bold prediction right now is that no matter who wins, that in the finale or the post show thing, what's it called? The
Reunion.
reunion show, that Mike and Dan bro hug. And that if they aren't already going to do it themselves, Probst encourages it.
I hope that happens. I hope that happens.
Give each other bro hug, and it's over. That's my prediction.
Well, I hope that you're right. I am less confident than you are. Just because, again, this is kind of jumps ahead, but in all of his post-show interview stuff, Dan does not seem to have. It's a little bit like we've talked about previously. Of it's like thinking Will is probably, when he comes off the show, going to be horrified at some of the things he said. Dan doesn't think he said anything wrong. And in fact,
slap Shireen at Ponderosa.
Well, what he has said is that he thinks the only reason he feels bad about that particular line is because he didn't know that she had some domestic abuse in her background. And if he had known that, he wouldn't have said that. But otherwise, it's just an expression. What's the big deal? And he's making it like it's
if they don't have domestic abuse in their background. If they're people just beat them.
And his point, of course, it's one thing to say that it's just a figure of speech. He doesn't mean it literally. And it's like, okay, well, we can believe that. And like, we don't necessarily think you were planning to physically slap her. But the problem is, it wasn't just one time. It wasn't just one sentence. It was your whole attitude throughout the game that people found objectionable. It wasn't just one out of context sentence, and that's all that anyone had any problem with. And that seems to be where he is missing this, is that everyone brings up that line and he seems to be thinking, it's just a figure of speech, people. I wasn't really talking about hitting anybody. And I guess that she has this violence thing, so I guess I feel bad about that, but come on. Besides, she's crazy anyway.
Yeah. I mean, that's the part that really bothers me, is that when in that tribal council, he was like, or not the tribal council, somewhere in there, he said it was like karma.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I feel bad, but it's karma.
Mm-hmm.
It's like,
yeah. It was not, I mean, the one line was really tacky, but it was just one of the high points of all of the other objectionable things that he had said in his whole general outlook.
Yes, it's just a very easy one to point to because it was so offensive. Like, it is an expression that you shouldn't use anymore because it's totally insensitive, and like, that's a real problem for some people. Like, you shouldn't. It's just not a thing you should say these days.
Yeah, yeah. It's like just a figure of speech. Well, how about it be a figure of speech you don't use anymore?
Yeah.
Because of this exact type of situation that you might find yourself in. And so
especially nowadays, like that has been, I mean, and to talk about, we were talking about the NFL earlier, like that has pushed domestic violence and gender equity, like right to the forefront of people's consciousness because of some of the behavior of some of the NFL players.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just people are ultra sensitive about that right now, and I think that's a good thing. It has become part of the national conversation again because of those things that have happened.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to be the guy going on TV saying shit like that. Like that, even if it's just an expression, like don't say that.
The thing is, it's just like we said. He doesn't think he said anything wrong. In his Ponderosa video, he talks about wanting to have come to the show and play like a hero, and he thinks he did. And in fact, when he is reflecting on his gameplay, he's saying, well, I just wanted to be a good guy and show that heroes can win, but, maybe I should have been more of a jerk. And I'm thinking, whoa.
You were a complete
yes. But I think he sincerely watches the show and doesn't see it.
That's sad.
Yeah.
So
now, again, without excusing any of Dan's behavior, it does also seem pretty consistent that almost everybody else out there agrees that Shireen is a handful and hard to take. That seems to be also true. Does not make what Dan did okay, but it's worth acknowledging in the broader complexity of the overall situation.
Yes, it's worth acknowledging. Yes.
Yeah. Any case, so we hadn't got past the first scene in the episode yet, but that's all right. We talked about important stuff. But so Dan is super mad still at Mike. To hell with Mike. He has no interest in working with him. Does not seem spooked by the votes he got, or at least he is deciding not to be. He's basically feeling like, you know, for whatever reason that happened, he's going to blame it on Mike for confusing everybody and not because it's a real situation. That seems to be his thoughts on it. We cut to Carolyn saying that she doesn't trust Dan. She approaches Mike, tells Mike about Dan's advantage, and says basically, you know, I wouldn't mind getting him out, but we don't have enough if it's just two of us, especially considering that he's got this vote doubler. But even still, she says in the confessional to us that, oh yeah, Mike's still going. If he doesn't win immunity, yeah, it's still him.
Yep. I just love that there was a couple of those.
Yeah.
Like, because I think Sierra has one in a minute or two also where she's like, I mean, I see what he's saying, and I'd be interested in doing that if we hadn't already decided that Mike has to go if he doesn't win.
Yeah. It's just kind of like no matter who it might be that Mike could help you get out, you would rather have that person be in the game than Mike.
Yep.
So in any case, we go to the reward challenge, and it's pretty, it's a small obstacle course plus knots plus puzzle to win a helicopter tour and surf and turf dinner with wine. And before they've even started, Rodney's talking again. Well, I guess Probst does bring it up, but was my birthday last time. Maybe someone this time. And I just loved that Probst was just not remotely sympathetic. He's just like, so is it just entitlement that you're feeling like you somehow deserve to go on a reward without having earned it?
The best part about Probst's demeanor here is he said something like, he said it like so just matter of fact, like an interview question. Like, So Rodney, I mean, is it just entitlement that makes you think like that? Where like he was pretty much pretty critical of him.
Yeah, he's basically just saying like, this is how the show works, dude. Like what do you think that we're doing the challenge for?
Right, and then here's another moment where Mike kind of owns that character, not himself, where he's like, I mean, I feel bad for Rodney, but just win, dude. Yeah. You want to go win.
And see, that's a perfect example of what we were talking about with Mike, which is that he's not wrong, but at the same time, by bringing it up, it's just making Rodney hate him that much more.
Yep. But it's what I was thinking.
Yeah. Well, it's what everybody except Rodney is thinking. I think even Rodney's ostensible allies are pretty tired of hearing this complaint at this point.
Well, it was just funny that he had already predetermined that he was going to lose the challenge and that someone would have to make this decision to give it to him. Like, he didn't even talk about it as an option of like, well, I haven't been on one yet. Nobody gave one to me, so I'm going to go get it myself. Like, that's a normal response in that situation, even if you had that meltdown,
Yeah. So let's see. Almost none of the stuff that happens before the puzzle matters at all because both teams take more than an hour on the puzzle to the point where Probst is having to give them progressively more and more easy clues. It's a complete set. Everything you need. I'm in therapy. I say these words so often. So that was kind of funny. But then just it almost felt preordained by this point, just to continue Rodney's whole narrative here, that the other team wins with Mike, Carolyn, and Will.
I did like the way they could set up the blocks.
Yeah.
Put them in the slots where the other team couldn't see them.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was a good I haven't actually read Dalton Ross this week, but I know that's a thing he often comments on, and I think he goes back and forth as to whether he's critical of it or it's just a thing about them not being able to see and cheat off of each other. And
right.
Yeah.
Well, what he usually says about it, and he didn't actually talk very much about it this week, but what he usually says about this in the context is, if there is nothing preventing you from cheating, there is nothing unethical about looking over at what the other team is doing. Usually it's not a great idea because if they have something you don't, it means they're already ahead of you and you're just taking time. But there's nothing unethical about it if it's not prevented by the challenge design. However, he thinks the challenge should be designed to prevent it.
Right. That's a great summation of it. Yep. It's not really he goes back and forth. He does have one consistent message. It's just that there are two pieces to it. Yep, that's right.
But so Carolyn handles this whole question in the worst possible way, which is to hem and haw about it for an extended period and then decide not to give it to him.
Right, and let Probst talk her into it, basically.
Yeah, like do it or don't. But teasing it out and then not giving it to him is like, that's the worst thing you could have done.
Oh, yeah. And Probst he did this so well because he definitely set it up in a way where she wouldn't give it to him, while also making it that much more unbearable for him.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, well, it's a social thing. You could do it, and maybe it buys you a vote later on.
Yeah.
Or you could give it to Rodney, and he could eat all this food, fill his belly, regain his composure, come back and win all the challenges, and feel great. So at the same time, she's like, I don't want that. And Rodney's like, oh, I really want that.
Well, and the thing is, it's like,
I love
Carolyn, like you have no obligation to do this. You won the challenge. It's yours, and you don't have to give it to him. And he's guilt tripping you, but you don't have to go give into that. But to consider it for so long and then say no makes it feel cruel. When before it was just like, well, no, it's yours. You do with it what you want.
Yeah, because for a while there, he's like, so you're saying there's a chance?
Yeah.
No.
And I just loved that she's saying, well, hopefully he won't take it personally. And I'm thinking, have you met Rodney? He takes the wind personally.
And he even goes and says, I know that people think I shouldn't take this personally, but I am. Yeah. Like, he's not even delusional about it.
Well, right, yeah. That's actually one of the interesting just contrasts between him and Dan, is that I think they ultimately both are playing very emotional games, but Dan believes that he is not. Rodney at least owns it.
Yeah.
But yeah, the helicopter ride did look pretty cool. So, I don't think Carolyn was regretting her decision. And then of course they're on the reward. Mike proposes final three, and Carolyn is kind of playing along. Meanwhile, Will is hesitant to even pretend that he's considering that.
I know he was kind of funny in that he was just like, and Mike's like, will you at least say you'll consider it?
At least don't let Rodney beat me.
Yeah.
Well.
Yeah.
I really can't think of any good reason why I should do any of those things.
Yeah, he didn't even do like the thing that other people are doing, which is like, yeah, I mean, we could at least consider it, and then going back and be like, we're not really considering that, right? Yeah, no.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is absolutely seems like Survivor 101 common sense that generally speaking, anyone comes to you with any kind of a plan, you don't just shut them down. You at least act non-committal, if not agree. Because why would you close a door like that?
Well, and the other piece to it is, I don't want to say that this was the reason why Carolyn and Dan and Mike were able to do what they ended up doing. I think this helped them, though, because by Mike and Carolyn both realizing that Will was not moving, Will had to feel very secure with Rodney, and so none of the ways that they planned involved really trusting Will and Rodney.
Yeah. Well, and that's exactly why Will should have been less stubborn about it, or less inflexible about it, because that when you basically shut someone down and say no way,
it means all the other plans happen and you don't know about them.
Yeah, it means they're going to stop talking to you about the stuff. They're going to stop including you in their plans, and they're going to make other plans instead. Whereas if you lead them on, maybe that stays their plan and you get to just choose to. Now, I think people get hesitant about not wanting to lie to people, but that's where the non-committal comes in. Right. But when you're just shutting someone down.
To do that, he was saying, would you at least consider it? And Will could say, you know what, I'll consider it.
It's like, I am always considering all my options.
Right. Because if Mike ever called him out on that, like say Will's in the final three and Mike says, you said you would consider me final three, and be like, I did consider it and I opted not to do it.
Yeah.
You know?
If I ever feel like it is in my best interests to do that, I will.
Yeah. That's really all he had to say. I mean, he's just, but he's not playing right now. I think we identified that.
Yeah.
He's not playing at all. He has no shot, you know.
So let's see. Back at camp, Rodney has decided that Carolyn is next because he's mad. It just so happens that she is also a good target because she's a good player. So I don't think anyone is really prepared to argue the point, because they might feel that anyway. And of course, just if Rodney is determined, then why antagonize him unnecessarily? Right,
because like if you're in their situation and Rodney says, I'm pissed at Carolyn, I want her to be next, and you say, Rodney, that's a terrible idea, I don't agree with you, and they said, you know what? No,
you're next. Yeah. You know, I'm not sure this is really true, but it just reminds me, we've certainly talked in the past about players who are going to ally with whoever talked to them last, and that being a regular thing, where I feel like with Rodney, it's almost more like, well, he's going to be mad at whoever he talked to last. I don't think that's quite true, but it amused me to think about that for a moment. So Dan finds two big melon fruit looking things. Did you recognize it? I thought it might be a papaya, but I don't really know what papayas look like.
I mean, they kept calling them watermelons, but they weren't, you know.
They did look melon-like, but not a variety that we are accustomed to here in the States.
I thought papayas were smaller, but...
You might be right. I don't really know what papayas look like. It just popped into my head.
But they may, like... You know,
actually, aren't papayas, don't they have like the reddish fruit inside the meat?
Yeah, and they have black seed, like dark black seeds. And this had white seeds.
I think it must have just been like a relative of the honeydew melon. That's what it looked like. Well, no, I guess it had, the honeydew with the, not the cantaloupe with the rough skin, but the honeydew. It looked like
looks kind of like a pale coconut. Yeah, that's a honeydew.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I know what honeydews look like, and it didn't look quite like that, but it could just be, you know, wild variety of, rather than the kind that looks nice in American grocery stores. So in any case, that they're pleased to discover that, and I was a little surprised that it's kind of like, can it really be that this is the first time that they have found, like they're growing near enough by that they were able to find them accidentally, but they hadn't found them in all this time? maybe there's just really not very many. It was just kind of a lucky find.
Yeah.
So in any case, Mike is continuing to try to pitch anybody and everybody who will even have a conversation with him. Talking to Sierra, saying, Dan, Rodney, and Will want to be the final three. They're not going to bring you or Carolyn or me. And then Sierra is kind of saying, you might be right. However, I also don't want to bring you. So I'm going to use them to get rid of you rather than use you to get rid of them and then have to be against you.
Yep. It was funny. She's just like, because he was so aggressive about it. Like,
yeah,
he's like, "Hey, sorry to interrupt what you're talking about. I won't stay long, but they are sleeping in the shack. They are sleeping in the shack."
Well, that was later, but that was a hilarious scene.
Oh, that was
because it was later, but at the same time, still, just especially how they're having a conversation and he just like creeps up behind him, and Sierra's literally like, "Geez, you scared the hell out of me."
Yeah,
and she's like standing there while he's talking, going.
And the best part is he acknowledges that he like startled them and then just went on about it anyway. Yeah.
Yeah. So I feel like it's definitely true that he is just so hyped up from being public enemy number one for so long that he has kind of let the social elements of the game slip a little bit. And maybe he just considers them a lost cause, so he's not spending emotional energy on it. But I think he should be spending more than he seems to be. He is playing very pushy. So let's see. We're getting a lot of build up for. Looks like you've frozen on my end. Perhaps we have a connection hiccup. Hopefully it will resolve itself shortly. Are you there? You
I am
moving again for you? All right, good.
You were frozen, but I think I was probably frozen on yours.
Yes.
Yeah.
So in any case, though, we were getting lots of build up for Mike cannot be allowed to win the immunity challenge. Cut to immunity challenge.
Yeah. Part of me is like kind of sad that they like tip it so much right now. Mm-hmm. But the other part of me is, you know what? It tells a good story. I enjoyed it. So.
And the thing is, honestly, I don't think it would have, like, let's say it was actually Sierra that won right at the last second. Don't you think that the editors still would have wanted to hit all of those? We've got to get Mike out. We've got to get Mike out beats. I feel like that's still the way they would have edited it, even if Sierra had won there at the last minute.
Yeah, you're right. So maybe I'm just sort of illusory correlation.
Well, no, I felt kind of the same thing. It was only just thinking back on it because it is certainly true that it happens a lot in this game that we get lots of. We just can't let so-and-so win, and then they do win. But it also could be that happens less intentionally than we think. It's just kind of we see the pattern. But frequently when you have someone who is being singled out for that kind of treatment, it's because everybody already knows that they are a threat to win and therefore have a better than average likelihood of winning in the first place, or else nobody would even be talking that way.
True.
But in any case, we ended up with Dan, Sierra, and Will on the maze with Mike before Mike wins. But I did want to call out just one moment where Rodney is flinging the grappling hook around, and then he literally has it so long that it just smacks right into the ground right at his feet, and he's just stands there and looks at it and just says, "Dude."
That happened twice. That's why he said, "Dude." It showed it one time before that. Mm-hmm. He didn't say anything, and he just went back to it, and then he did it again, and that's when he looked at it and went, "Dude." So it was like a common thing with him.
Yeah.
And
Well,
we say that all those people were there, but Will was barely at that puzzle.
yeah, he only just barely got to it. I think it in this though, Sierra was super close. I mean, that was down to the wire. It could have gone either way. Dan, I think, wasn't as close right at the end, but certainly they were in a challenge like that where it can fall out and you have to start over. I mean, he could have done it. I mean, it wasn't outside of the realm of possibility.
No, and I was sitting there watching, and I know we've seen this one before, but the way that this played out, you could really see how good this challenge design is.
Mm-hmm.
Because yes, you eventually pick up the technique of how to do it, but the concept of how you get to the end versus it's very Survivor-like. You know, how you get to the end piece is very different from how you complete the end piece.
Yeah.
And you know, because now all of a sudden you're trying to get it into a very finite, and so how they've designed it in a way where it's not just easy for it to drop in to the final hole, but yet you're now, instead of avoiding the hole, you're trying to get it in the hole, and it's not super easy. You have to be a lot more precise, you know, whereas before you're kind of general, precise movement.
Yeah, you can do a big move and rely on it landing into one of the dead ends over there, and then you can do another big move and get it into that one over there, and then you back and you move it in. But at the end,
precision, yeah, to get past a hole, and then you know you keep going. But it's a very different technique, and it was very interesting because they both had it in there, and they're both like swirling around this thing.
Mm-hmm. It's very suspenseful. Yeah.
Yeah.
But Mike does pull it out. Good for him. That's, I think they said, his third individual immunity win. And he declares that he has the 4th of July in Texas inside. Fireworks and all that stuff. No happy dance this time. But only because he's sitting down, I think. He might have done it just off camera. Although I think for sure they would have shown it if he had done it to the camera. Dan is frustrated. I think they all are, but Dan is the one that groans to the camera.
Because he hates Mike so much.
Yeah. But he's not, it's not emotional though. It just makes me so mad.
I'm just so rationally angry.
Yeah. He's a liar who hurt my feelings, so for strategic reasons, he has to go. So in any case, he coordinates with Sierra, Will, and Rodney to vote Carolyn, although they tell him, okay, we're going to be telling Carolyn that it's you, so just so you don't freak out. But of course, you know, the dilemma for Dan in that situation is, you know, how do you know that it's not actually the opposite, that they are actually working with Carolyn to vote for you, and they're just telling you that it's Carolyn.
To be fair to the rest of them, they played this really well, like the ones that wanted to get out Carolyn, because had she not had that idol, they would have gotten rid of Carolyn and burned the advantage because he wasn't sure, and that's fine, you know? Yeah.
I suspect that is a big part of why. And you know, so it's interesting too, because Mike's play here was to try to say he heard them talking about getting out Dan, and so he goes to Dan and tries to say, listen, this is what's going to happen. And of course, Dan's take on this is he doesn't like having stuff dictated to him, and that's why, and he just basically is in a position where he's not even prepared to listen to a word Mike says, and it's almost a matter of like, well, I was more worried about it before you came to tell me that. And we have to at least give Dan the credit in this context that he was right, that his alliance actually was with him. Now, I think we can also look at that from the perspective of Carolyn's a bigger threat than he was. So it makes more sense for them to try to get out Carolyn than Dan. But at the same time, again, just in terms of playing the odds on his own behalf, he was right. Although it's interesting that I mean, we're not quite at the final tribal, but it is interesting that he just decides to play his extra vote just because this actually seems like a case where your extra vote may not actually make any difference either way, because either they're all lying to you and they're actually all voting for you, in which case your one extra vote probably won't make the difference. Or you're right, in which case you already have their votes. You don't need your extra. But I suppose it hedges your bets in case you get like one or two people flipping.
Yeah, I didn't really. You're right. Like if you really take a step back and think through it, but at the same time, if you're nervous.
Mm-hmm. You didn't want to end up getting voted out and then still have it and feel like you didn't even try.
Right. He is enough of a student of the game that he's realized you don't want to ever be the one left with your advantage or your idol in your pocket.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought it was fine for him to use it. I'm not too critical of him.
Yeah, I'm not either. I was just
never.
I wasn't really thinking that he was wrong to play it so much as I was just thinking about how, in what seemed to me to be the two most likely scenarios, his vote wouldn't have actually made a difference either way. But it would have protected against the idea that most of them were going to be voting for Carolyn, and some would be voting for Dan, and the one extra might make a difference. You know what I mean? Like if it wasn't either all unanimous against Dan or all unanimous against Carolyn, if it was actually split in some way, then it would make a difference.
Right, because that's happened before where people have decided to just split the votes and then re-vote just in case, Yeah. Mm-hmm. And he would have saved that from happening.
Yeah, like
know what was going on, know?
Hypothetically, what if Mike and Carolyn are both voting for Dan, and what if they had brought one more person over, and your extra vote means you don't have to do tiebreaker?
Yep.
So I don't think he was wrong to play it. It's just I think the two most likely scenarios in my mind were that they were either all voting for Carolyn or all voting for Dan, in which case his one vote doesn't make any difference. But so having played out in this iteration at least one full cycle, I think the two vote advantage is a cool idea. I hope they continue doing that.
Yeah, I guess we should really quickly, just though, to your point, he did mention that he didn't know if this would make a difference, but he wanted to go down swinging. Yeah. So it was almost like he was nervous, even if he agreed that they were all going for him and his vote didn't matter, at least he was acknowledging that he tried. Like, I think he would have been okay with that, just kind of like he was with the way that it went down. He used his vote, he tried. There was, a spade that could trump him.
Mm-hmm. The worst case outcome for him would have been for him to get voted out and not having played it. That's a worse case outcome than any other iteration. Because if he does play it and still goes out, oh well, there was nothing he could do. If he doesn't play it and goes out, that's the worst. If he doesn't play it and he's stays in, that's the best, but he would rather avoid the worst than hope for the best.
Right. And even if logically we can look at it and say he got voted out but didn't play it, but it wouldn't have mattered anyway, for as rationally, emotionally as he's playing,
it would have felt like he didn't do everything he could have.
Right. He would have been upset with himself. And so this, for him, who I'm already kind of sad for, I was glad that he could go out and feel like he did everything he could do and that he was just merely trumped by a better advantage, and so be it.
You're sad. You're feeling sad for Dan?
I'm feeling sad for Dan as a person because he doesn't see how horrible the things.
Oh, yeah.
As I said that earlier. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I see that. I'm
sad that he went out. Sad that that he doesn't recognize, so he can't make improvements,
Yeah. Well, and also, like, the thing is, I'm sure he's getting a lot of, internet hate, which a lot of it is justified. But again, because he doesn't get it, he's going to probably take it more as a personal sort of rejection from the world at large, as opposed to a criticism of specific behavior, because he's not able to identify what that behavior is.
Right.
Let's see. Yeah, I don't know. Do we? So the fact that Carolyn, and again, we have to also remember that, to give him the credit here strategically, that he was right, that his alliance was not turning on him.
Mm-hmm.
And so if not for Carolyn playing her idol, she would have gone out. So good for her that she did. Except, of course, just like Mike last time, now that that's out of the picture, she's definitely still in danger, and they're both outnumbered.
And she celebrated it just like Mike does.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting too that the two people who are the biggest targets also don't want to go to the end with each other even. So it's not even really easy for them to work as two against the three. And if they can just get one more person to come over to them, because not only would no one want to go to the final three with Mike and Carolyn, but Mike and Carolyn don't even want to go to the final three together. So that's weird.
Yes. It's all played out very weird by the fact that, like, all of the really good players that the likable players all went out early in the jury.
Yeah. I was pleased with one of the clips from Next Time where we have Rodney confronting Carolyn for not telling them she had an idol, and she's like, "All of you voted for me."
Yeah. You all didn't tell me you were voting for me.
It's like, well, you didn't tell us about your idol before that. So you did the wrong thing first.
That was amazing.
Yeah. So we'll see. I mean, we kind of already handicapped the finale, I think, in terms of who we think has the best shot.
Yeah. I mean, I think Rodney has to be the favorite, just simply because Mike and Carolyn are going to have to win.
Yeah.
Though they are the most likely to win if they do manage to come through that. So.
Yeah. So, did you get a chance to look at the Survivor Second Chance castaways?
Is it done, or is it?
Well, no, they're going to announce the results at the finale. But last episode we talked about reviewing them and saying what we thought about them.
I forgot we talked about that. I mean, I have looked at them, but I have not.
Well, so I'll put the link here in the chat so you can just pull it right up. But maybe we can just kind of look through them briefly, because I'll admit I didn't get to do a deep research.
Yeah, I didn't exactly do like a pre-show on it.
But I looked at them. I kind of skimmed through them. I certainly remember some better than others. But so maybe we just talk highlights rather than trying to make it like, here's the 10 that I vote for, and because they definitely have it 32 totals. So it's 16 women and 16 men, and presumably it's going to be the top 8.
Kind of separated it like they're voted for separately.
Yeah. That was one of the things we did speculate on initially, was just because they're still going to want to have 8, half and half men and women, which I think is the right way to go. I found that there were more of the men that I remembered specifically. I mean, there were several women that I did also, but I feel like more of the men I did.
Yeah, I remember that same thing. Looking at it now, yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's also true that I think makes perfect sense that I tend to remember better the ones that were in a more recent season, male or female. So,
and to be, I mean, honest, I mean, it feels like to me, I don't want this to be biased, but that if it is, let me know. But the men seem to be more distinct. The women are a lot of them are fairly similar and nondescript. That's kind of how I felt. And
I mean, there's some standouts there. Like I remember liking Tasha a lot from her season. Sierra was also pretty good, and she went in her season. She was kind of handicapped because it was in the blood versus water, and so she was dealing with her mom in the game too. Kind of handicapped her game.
I think maybe that's part of it. And again, this is the thing: is maybe because of the way these shots are done, they look different. More.
Yeah, they're very glamour shotty.
Right. And so the women look more different than they do in the episodes than the men do. The men look much more similar to how they look on TV.
Definitely.
Yeah, maybe that's probably what I'm feeling.
Yeah. No, I agree. A lot of the women I wouldn't recognize just from their picture. Michaela was a player that we liked in that season, but was sacrificed at the altar of Brandon Hance finding her attractive, and therefore she has to go.
Yes.
So I remember we liked her, and it was a shame that he pushed so hard to get her out for dubious reasons.
Yep.
Kelly Wigglesworth is an interesting choice because she was the second place finisher in the very first season. So I feel like it would be fun to have her back almost just for that reason.
Yeah, I kind of want to vote for her just to see like 31 seasons later, like what can she bring to the table that's different, having been part of that original one, which set so much of the tone. I like that.
Cass was fun last time around.
Yep.
I like Carolyn this time, so assuming she doesn't win and become ineligible, then I wouldn't mind having her back. I have mixed feelings about Shireen coming back. I don't know about you.
Yeah, I mean, I like her fine, but I just don't think she doesn't do well socially, and so I don't feel like she'd be long for the game, and it's almost like...
well, she also just seems like she's maybe a little bit emotionally fragile, and to the point where maybe it would be better if she's not still continuing to be on TV.
Yeah.
I hesitate to make that choice for somebody else, but I also just I feel like it would probably just be a recipe for more uncomfortable things. Like I don't want to see a repeat of she drives people crazy and then she gets upset when they don't like her.
Yeah.
So we'll see. There's Abby Maria wants to come back. Neither of us were especially a fan of hers last time around.
Nope. Remember her.
Yeah. So at least, I could probably, look up some of the other players and, try to look up notes for what we thought about them. But those, we kind of talked about the ones that kind of stood out to me.
Yep.
For the men, we both talked about Spencer last time. I would definitely like to have him back. I think Keith would be fun to have back. He was fun last time. Steven, I think, would be a good choice. He's, from one of the older seasons compared to, a lot of the others. But he was, JT's partner in crime all the way to the end, but then didn't quite manage to get out from under JT's shadow. But I liked him, and they were a good team, and he seemed like a good player the last time. So I would like to have him back.
Yep.
Joe.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, I skipped ahead. Joe. Yep. I don't need Max back.
Yeah. Yeah, he didn't make too, like, he only made a weird impression.
Yeah.
Brad or Vetus, I could be okay with, although I don't know that I felt like Vetus had a cool arc when he was on with his brother, but I don't know that I necessarily need him again.
I liked both of them, so I'd watch them again.
Yeah, I certainly wouldn't be opposed to it, and I'm not sure that there's 8 others that I would vote for necessarily other than them. I don't know about Troyzan necessarily. Wu, I would like back.
Yeah, I'm not needing Troyzan and Shane. Shane was the one that walked up that first day.
Yeah. That was a running theme every time we talked about Shane, just because it was like day one is like, hey, we're all standing in a circle. Let's be a Final Four.
Yep.
But yeah, so there's several good players to see who we might get back. But
I think it's gonna be fun no matter who they pick. I mean, I think they do a good job. So.
Yep, it's a good selection, and anybody who is interested in that sort of thing should know that all of those people are actively campaigning on Twitter, and not just Twitter, but their social media generally.
Interesting.
And so, if you want to vote, you better make sure you go ahead and do it, because they're going to announce the final cast at the live reunion show on Wednesday.
Yep, 5 days.
Yep. All right, so we're ready for the finale.
Excited.
Yep. Even though our prospects for the final 3 are not the most exciting 3 people we could have picked, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
it'll be fine.
Yeah, it's been fun. I mean, I'm not angry about any of the people, so yeah, it's been fun.
All right. So I think that does it for this episode. Thank you, everybody, for listening and or watching. You can find the podcast notes at christianaellis.com, and we'll be back next week for the finale. All right.